Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakurotam pravaram muninam padanchalim pranchaliranatosmi stve padanchalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. We are going through the early part of Samadhi Pada. As I mentioned in the last session, we already discussed the first 14 sutras at the beginning of the text, because those sutras contain many definitions which are very important for us to understand. And then we started with Sadhana Pada, which is the logical beginning, the practice, then the results, Vibhuti Pada, and now Samadhi Pada. After this, after completing the entire Samadhi Pada, we will go to Kaivalya Pada, which is the last, that is the fourth chapter of the text. As I mentioned some time earlier, one unique contribution of Patanjali's system is this concept of samskaras. It's a unique contribution to world psychology, to modern psychology, though it's not very often recognized. The Patanjali himself doesn't directly expound this idea of these concept of samskaras in his sutras, but Vyasa, in his commentaries, he elaborates on this. So in this context, I would like to read what Vyasa says. He says, Chittam ayaskanta manikalpam sannidhi matropakari trishyattvena sumbhavadi purushasya swaminaha. That is the, just reading one very important and celebrated passage from Vyasa's commentary. What it means is, mind is compared to a magnet. Ayaskantamani means a magnet. Now, by being fit to be seen and by being useful due to its proximity, it becomes the property of its master Purusha. In other words, mind getting attracted to Purusha, and different objects get attracted to mind. And as a result of this, impressions, vasanas, vrittis, samskaras get fixed on the mind. Chittamabi ayas visheja tasya susmin sannidhikarana matra dusyatyurupa upagaram kurvat purushasya sambhavati swaminaha bhoga sadhanatva. Anyway, I'm not going to details. I shall try to explain what is this part. What is this idea of samskara? So whatever we do with our senses of perception, like the eyes, ears, sense of smell, sense of touch, sense of taste, whatever we do, we see an object, and when we see an object, we are using the mind and eyes. Eyes alone cannot bring an impression into the mental system. So mind also should be there. Then only this process we call cognition that will take place. So also, when we come to know something by hearing, when we hear a sound, let's say of a car moving in the streets, the sense of hearing brings that sound and the mind recognizes, but it doesn't end there. It deposits an impression on the mental system. Just as a visual experience leaves an impact on the mental system, the audio experience also will leave an impact on the mental system. And similarly, when we taste, that also will leave an impact. Similarly, smell and so on. Now, we are going to discuss vrittis. Vrittaya panchadaya klishtaha klishtaha. That's what we are going to discussed in the 5th sutra. So before we take up this sutra, I'm creating the right background. Now, whenever we do something at the, I mean, with the full awareness that we are doing, that is when we do something consciously, that conscious activity will leave its mark on the mental system. And then it becomes a vritti, and that vritti will go deeper and it becomes a tendency, because vrittis actually influence the mind. And vrittis later come back to the surface of the mind as memory. And memory will further strengthen the vritti. So every time when we remember something, that memory gets strengthened and it goes deeper and deeper. And then it becomes a strong tendency. It's called samskara. I don't think there can be any proper substitute in a single word for the Sanskrit word samskara. All that we can say tendencies, impressions, we may have to use many words to really imply what the word samskara actually implies in the word in Sanskrit language. Because these samskaras constitute our habits, the way we think, the way we react, the way we interpret life. All these are created by our samskaras. In fact, our real personality is nothing but a constituent of our samskaras. And of course, these samskaras are related to 5 vrittis, vrittaya panchadaya, pramana viparya vikalpa nidra smrtayaha vrittayaha. We'll discuss in the coming sutras. Certain knowledge that we understand using our own reasoning power, then certain things that we may misunderstand, which really doesn't have an actuality, that also will create an impression. Sometimes we hear a word which may not have a real objective reality, that also will create. Similarly, memory and also sleep, all these are different kinds of vrittis. We are going to discuss that. Anyway, whatever it is, these samskaras, as I mentioned, constitute our subtle personality. And then these samskaras will again, in their turn, will further influence our actions. So actions create vrittis, which become samskaras. And again, these samskaras will again prompt similar actions, which also will create new vrittis. Of course, the way the samskaras or impressions influence our actions can be in the form of extreme infatuation, extreme dislike, or an aversion, moving away from something. Raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Krishna samskara, these are the kleshas actually. So these samskaras will influence our mind, our behavior, the way we react. It creates some strong liking for certain things, strong dislike for certain things, and also a tendency to move away without either infatuation or strong attachment. Now, this is how Vyasa slowly draws the picture of this wheel of karma, vritti, samskara, chakram. So actually there are 2 more components in between. Karma is action, vritti is its effect, residual effect. Samskara is formed after vrittis, and these samskaras will create vasanas. Vasanas are related to samskaras. Say a person born with a particular attitude, interest in music, art, literature, maybe in a family of musicians, A growing child may have a vasana, an aptitude for learning music. It could be, one can easily understand if you understand the family background. It's a biological inheritance. But there are cases, and there are many cases, not one, but it is commonly found that there are families with child may be born who may be totally different from all other children, and also totally different from his parents, grandparents on maternal or paternal side. So Vedanta and Yoga will tell you here also you are actually you're actually witnessing the influence of samskaras. That person may have practiced his music in his previous life, so those tendencies get deposited in the mental system, and they come back to you when you are born, and then this strong tendency for music, art, or literature, anything like that. I mean, just giving an example. It need not necessarily be linked to the biological inheritance of the family. It could be independent. In other words, life is interpreted as one continuous flow of samskaras. This is the unique contribution of Vyasa, meaning the concept of samskaras playing an important role in human character, in human behavior patterns. Now, fifth sutra, we already finished the fourth sutra in last session. Vrittaya Panchadaya Krishtaha Krishtaha. So these vrittis are fivefold. Some of which are called klishta vrittis. Some of them are called aklishta vrittis. So klishta vritti, see for example, klishta vritti means certain impressions or residual effects of experiences which create or cause certain psychological phenomena called kleshas. What are the kleshas? Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha. This definition comes in the sadhana pada. That's why I took sadhana pada earlier. So once we remember that, this can be easily understood. Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha. Five kleshas. Avidya is technically, it doesn't mean ignorance. It actually means our non-awareness of our true nature. That is what avidya actually implies. The technical interpretation in scripture, one thing, what it actually could imply in real terms, in our present context, that is not different, but that should also be explained. So what is this this avidya? Avidya means our absence of our true nature. If we always remember that we are not one of the evolutes of Prakriti, then we won't be affected by any uh, of these impressions or vrittis. If you are fully aware of your true identity as Purusha or Atman, then whatever happens to you, whatever you do, you can do without that action leaving behind its mark or leaving behind its impact. But when we act as slaves, in the sense when we act according to the circumstances or dictated by the needs and circumstances, then we are acting not as masters, but we are acting as slaves. Towards the end of the Yoga Sutra, in the Samadhi Pada, and also the Kaivalya Pada, you find we can do everything as masters. Then there will be no klesha. But normally, when we are not aware of our spiritual identity, then we do things according to the needs. So there is a difficult situation. Immediately we get excited, we lose our balance. It's because we are not aware of our true identity. If a person loses money and he is shattered, that's because he identifies himself with the money that he has lost, because he identifies himself as somebody who gets money and who loses money, or he identifies himself with his everyday empirical needs and circumstances. When we interpret ourselves to be something higher than that, then it will not have any effect on us. So that is avidya. Asmita means it's again our own sense of what we are. Asmita. Then raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, extreme liking, extreme dislike, and then a tendency to avoid. These are the three different ways in which minds react when we are under the influence of klishta vrittis. So that is one set of vrittis, aklishta. Then there are vrittis which are not klesha vrittis. The Yoga Sutra will tell you that many of these deeper vrittis, influences, or impressions may remain in our mental system for several life cycles. Many of the samskaras do not manifest in the present life. They may have a lasting influence, and they may remain for a long time in the mental system. And that mental system is called karmasya. It's like a repository where all the karmas, means actions, the results, impressions, vasanas, samskaras, they're all deposited. And they unfold in the succeeding life cycles. That's why people, sometimes you find some people after maybe after 70 years, 80 years, suddenly they may develop an interest in mysticism, spirituality, things like that. Suddenly when they reach 70 years or 80 years. And some people will develop this tendency when they're very small. And some people will develop a tendency in many of these higher values when they are small. And slowly they get faded, and again they may completely forget about it. So there is no certainty in that. Many of them, when not fully reinforced or supported at the appropriate stage, may fade away, but they may come back again, maybe in the next life. So sometimes when we feel a great inexplicable, indescribable attraction or interest in an area of learning or in a way of life, which may be different from the way of life of normal people, that's because that person has done certain things and experienced certain things which have created vasanas and samskaras and impressions, which prompt him to move and think and act in a certain manner, in a certain way in this life. So this is how the karma, vritti, samskara, vasana, sankalpa, chakram. So chakra means wheel. So it's not a straight line. It's a wheel. Why? Because till we get our spiritual realization, life moves like a wheel and not a straight line. A straight line has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A cycle or a wheel, it doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have a middle, it doesn't have an end. But it is something that we rotate with. So this is how life is interpreted. Karma, vritti, samskara, chakram. That is a unique contribution of Vyasa. So that is why in the fifth sutra, Patanjali says, Prutaya Panchadeya, these vrittis are fivefold. In the coming sutras, we'll discuss that. Klishtaha, aklishtaha. I mean, vrittis with kleshas, which is called klishta vrittis Without klesha, this is called akrishta vritti. The deeper samskaras are krishta vrittis. Deeper samskaras remain deposited in the repository. We call it karmashya. As I mentioned, they may unfold not in this life necessarily, but even in the succeeding life cycles. Now, the next sutra is this. Now, remember, Patanjali has not devoted any particular sutra to define and describe samskara. The Vyasa has done it. So, this is an important point, remember. It is Vyasa's contribution. Tataha jatiyakaha samskaraha prithibireva kriyante. Samskarascha vrittaya iti evam vritti samskara chakram anisham avartade. A very, very famous celebrated statement in Vyasa's commentary. He's talking about his wheel. What it means is vrittis produce corresponding samskaras. Samskaras also can cause sankalpa. Sankalpa means a will, a will or a volition. I will do this, something like that. And then vasana is aptitude to do something in a way. So vasanas can be most characteristically explained when you talk about a little small child's natural prodigal tendency, a power to music, art, literature, or something. Yes, vasana for it. I mean, it is not aptitude, because the word aptitude was a well-structured definition in educational psychology and also broadline psychology. Aptitude has its own definite meaning in educational psychology and also in mainstream psychology. Vasana it is something, because it also implies something that comes from somewhere else, not from this life necessarily, from previous life. That is not implied in the English word aptitude. That's why I specifically mentioned it implies something much more than what it normally implies in education psychology. So vrittis produce corresponding samskaras, and through samskaras, vrittis are created. You see, that's how. So it's just like seeds. From seeds comes the mango, comes a tree, and from tree we get seeds, and from seeds we get trees, plants, and from plants we become trees, we get seeds again. So it's something like that. So vrittis create samskaras, and samskaras create vrittis, because samskaras will prompt you to act in a familiar manner, because our mind always acts according to certain patterns that it is familiar with. Every thought will produce a furrow in the mental system, and then when we try to think of that idea, then that our mind is trying to travel, is trying to move through the familiar, the known furrow, the known road. That's how we are able to remember things. So vrittis create samskaras, and samskaras reinforce vrittis by prompting similar or identical actions. Thus, the wheel of vritti and samskara, Vyasa says in his language, anisham avartade. It revolves endlessly. He says, goes on rotating this. That's how our life is interpreted. Okay, now one may ask this question, does it mean that everything is predetermined? That's a very big question that frequently is asked when we discuss Yoga Sutras. Does it mean that everything is predetermined, predeterminism? No, really speaking. In fact, Vedanta and Yoga actually challenge the very concept of predeterminism. Vedanta and yoga constitute some kinds of informal, declaration of independence, really speaking. Is that if you've got a God sitting somewhere who has already decided what to do with you, then you may try to be a Christ or a Buddha. Still, there's no way out because already your passport is ready to go to either hell or heaven. Saint Peter will not take no for an answer. You have to obey. But Vedanta and yoga directly challenge the very concept of predeterminism. Because when Vyasa talks about this wheel, he also emphasizes the point that we have the freedom to get out of the wheel. Otherwise, there is no need of studying Yoga Sutra and also for Patanjali to write the sutras. So, there is a way out of the wheel. As Buddha says, get out of the wheel of sorrow. So also there is a way out of the wheel. That's what Patanjali is talking about. So that's the whole scheme of Yoga Sutras. Now next one is now ini pramana vipirya vikalpa nidra smrdeha. Means true knowledge pramana and viparya. Viparya is the opposite of true knowledge, wrong knowledge. We'll understand gradually. Conceptual knowledge, things that really do not exist, that is vikalpa. Nidra, sleep, memory. So dreams and memories are interpreted in identical terms in Vedanta and Yoga because dreams are linked to our previous experiences. Memories are nothing but reappearance of our samskaras from previous experiences. So now first comes this means the true knowledge. That's pure epistemology. I discussed in many contexts. And pratyaksha anumana agamaha pramanani. What are the pramanas? I mean, as I mentioned, these different systems of Indian philosophy accept different categories of tools of knowledge. Of them, the Yoga Sutra and Sankhya both accept direct perception, pratyaksha, inference, anumana, and verbal testimony, that is agama. So Vyasa himself, actually, he defined pratyaksha. Indriya pranalikaya chittasya bahya vastu uvaragad, mean perception, is that vritti which arises when the mind is affected, that is uparanga, means colored by an external object. So when we see an object using our senses of perception and mind, then out of that contact of the sense of perception like eyes and also the mind together, a visual object is cognized, and that cognition becomes the foundation of pratyaksha pramana, direct perception. So that's then next one is inference. Inference is, of course, we all know, this is all same in Western philosophy, also inference. Practically Aristotle, ancient Greek philosophy, they all accept this direct perception and inference are the same. Of course, verbal testimony is something alien, not found in Aristotelian epistemology, that is believe in the revealed scriptures and believe when we read a scriptural statement which should be authentic, we do not go against the validity of direct perception and inference. When we read in a book things that we normally cannot understand using our natural means of cognition, then we have to depend upon what is stated in a book. But that information can be verified through our own practice and experience. Then Agama Pramana, Shabda Pramana, another name, becomes another epistemological tool. As I mentioned earlier, this Hindu system, Hindu philosophy has got the most extensive and expansive uh, outlook towards epistemology and pramanas, theories of knowledge. So it accepts the Pratyaksha, Anumana, Vamana, Shabda, Arthavatya, Anubalabdhi, Sambhava, Aitihya, and Cheshta, Parishesha, total 10. I have explained this earlier, but briefly I shall explain. Pratyaksha means direct perception. Anumana is inference. Upamana is analogy, this comparison. Shabda is verbal testimony. Arthavati is the presumption when you cannot use inference. Anubalabdhi is the absence of something somewhere, that is absence of something is also an information of its absence. Cheshta is actually, it could be included in inference, but some of the fringe groups, not prominent schools of philosophy, some of the relatively unimportant schools of Indian philosophy, they expand this epistemology further, and this Cheshta is an external gesture. Sambhava is a real incident that we have experienced. Aitihya is hearsay or folklore, and Parishesha is deduction. Just something like Sherlock Holmes uses in his books, when he is trying to find out an explanation by reducing, by excluding all other possibilities. Through careful analysis, you are forced to accept something as the only possible explanation. It is called Parishesha. Parishesha means what is left out. That's what it's what is left out. So these are the 10 tools of knowledge in the mainstream Hindu philosophy, of which the Indian materialists accept only one, that is Charvaka school, accept only Pratyaksha, and some of the Buddhist philosophical schools accept Pratyaksha, direct perception, and inference. And as here, for example, this yoga accepts Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Agama, 3. And Sankhya also accept 3. Nyaya, Indian logic, accept 4. And one school of Indian ritualistic philosophy, known as Prabhagara system, accept 5. And that is up to Anubalabdhi. And the Bhatta system of Indian ritualistic philosophy, Mimamsa system, accept 6. Vedanta also accepts 6. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Umana, Shabda, Arthavati, Anubalabdhi. That is direct perception, inference, analogy, verbal testimony, presumption, and negation. That is for mainstream Vedanta. And of course, some of the Puranas and mythological schools accept some other tools as tools of valid knowledge, but they are actually included in the inference or analogy or presumption by other schools. So just give a brief overview of the landscape of Indian epistemology. Now, next one is next sutra is. If I'm going fast because they already discussed this elaborately during the early part of the class. Of course, we have 2 YouTube systems available. One is what we discussed 3-4 years back, and also recently, maybe about 6, 7, 8 months back. Then the 8th sutra, Vibhiryayo Mithya Jnanam Adadruva Pradishtam. I think I discussed this also. So yeah, Pratyaksha discussed. Yeah. Next, Vibhirya. What is Vibhirya? Vibhirya is false knowledge of a thing which really doesn't correspond to the real form. The classical example in books, suppose you're walking in the seashore, you see a brilliant shining object which looks like a piece of silver, but actually it is only a mother of pearl, a worthless insignificant shell of some creatures lying on the sand, and because the sunlight is falling on it, you mistake it is shining like silver, so you mistake it like silver. You may know immediately it is not silver. So that kind of that is kind of false knowledge. It doesn't really correspond to the object in front of you. It is called viparya. Viparyo mithyaඥānam adadruva pradishtham. That is means pramanena viparya, false knowledge. Badhyate. Why it is called viparya? Because you take it in your hand and you use direct perceptions, you observe it with your eyes and mind, and then you use inference, and you may compare it with the real silver, and you find it is not silver, but it looks like that. So it is viparya. Now, why does it become a vritti? In fact, that experience which is immediately negated, I mean, you are seeing in front of you something, you mistake it for something else, a piece of some shell of some creatures, mother of pearl we call it, is mistaken to be a piece of silver. And you take it, immediately you understand it is not silver. So the misunderstanding is gone. But that contrasting pictures of the real silver and this insignificant shell which resembles like that, which you are seeing, that experience will be remembered, and it will leave its impact on the mental system. So even this vritti, viparya, can influence our actions. When we go and try to buy, say, silver from a shop, then we may check whether it is something like this or not. Constant checking. The influence of this previous experience. Just like pramana, something that you really perceived, that of course naturally, obviously, will create a vritti. But even the recognition of the fact that what you really saw lying on the seashore is not actually silver, that is still sufficient to leave a vritti on the mental system, and that vritti will resurface. It will come back to the mind when you go to some shop and you're trying to buy something. I may make sure it is the real thing or not. There's influence of it. So that's why it doesn't leave the mind vacuum, empty. It leaves a vritti. So this is an example. And the next one is vikalpa. Shabdajnananupadi vastushunyo vikalpa. Now, this is conceptual knowledge, which is devoid of a corresponding object and is conjured up by knowledge which arises from words. So here it is Sabdajnananupadi, means that vritti, this vikalpa vritti, arises when you hear something. But viparya vritti, the previous one, arises when you see that object lying on the seashore, which looks like silver, which is not silver. So there is a qualitative difference between viparya and vikalpa. Vikalpa is linked to a word formation. You hear something, and you know when you hear, it is absolutely unreal. When you hear it, what you hear about it contains its own contradiction, its own negation. But in the case of viparya, of course, you have a feeling that what is lying on the seashore cannot be silver, but still the resemblance is visual. But here, it is an audio experience. You hear it, but when you hear it, immediately it is negated, but still it creates vritti. So the example is, of course, you know, there is a verse in Sanskrit. There is a well-known verse. What it says is this, you know, there are certain words, you know, see, Mrigatishnam vasijnataha, Mrigatishnam vasisnataha, Kapushpa Dhridashekharaka, Esha Vandhya Sudo Yadi, that is the that is an example given. Mrigatishnam vasisnataha means somebody has taken a bath in the mirage. Now, what is mirage? Mirage is something that you see when you drive in a car from a distance, and the road is very wide, well paved. The sunlight, brilliant sunlight, creates the impression that what you are seeing in front of you is a pool of water. This happens in deserts. It happened in deserts. That is Mrigatishnam Vasijnana. We are taken bath in a pool of water of mirage, which when you hear it, you know it is absolutely meaningless, it's absolutely unreal. Again, Kapushpa Dhridashekharaka. And his gentleman is coming after having taken bath in the pool of mirage, and he's adorned his hair with a flower which is picked up from the sky. First of all, there cannot be sky in the flower. So there can be nobody who has adorned his hair with a flower he has picked up from the sky. So it is absolutely unreal. Vandhyasuda means the son of a bad woman. So what it means is, so anyway, these are the old stock phrases and verses the ancient Indian philosophers have coined so that you can easily define things, you can easily convey the idea. Instead of writing long paragraphs in the traditional Indian gurukulas and schools, they have formed these stock phrases which are transmitted from generation to generations of students and teachers. So immediately the true meaning of vikalpa becomes obvious. See, somebody who has taken a bath in Mrigatishnam Bhasi means in the mirage, in the desert pool, desert pond. There cannot be a pond because the wide expanse of sand creates the illusion that it is a pool of water. Maybe this could happen in the broad highways also, freeways also, when there are no vehicles. Now here, when you hear it, it is obvious that it is devoid of a corresponding object. So, but it is conjured up by knowledge which arises from words. Sabdajanitam jnanam sabdajnanam anupadidam sheelam yasya sa sabdajnana anuvadi. What it means is, really speaking, a knowledge produced by words, it can be called this the verbal knowledge, Shabdajanitam Jnanam, the knowledge which thus actually follows the words, but actually it doesn't have a corresponding reality. That is Vikalpa. In other words, what Patanjali implies, I want to make that clear. Whatever may be the source of impressions we gather from direct action, from direct perception, recognition of a real object, or maybe some kind of impression that comes which is automatically negated, like let's say this Viparya, you know, seeing the mother of pearl be mistaken for a conch shell, may be mistaken for a piece of silver, which is absolutely unreal, or even the kind of word formations which are themselves are contradictory and unreal. So all these are enough to create a wrong vritti. It will remain the system. Some of the phobias and obsessions can be explained as the result of such experiences. Of course, people who people who may have experienced house breaks by an error, maybe have left a person may have left the door unlocked by mistake, and there was a house break that night. So that person, if he has a slight difficulty, mental imbalance, he can perhaps develop some kind of an obsession. He will go on checking every day whether the door is locked or not. This could happen. Though he knows that it is actually against the reality, but still he's under the influence of this previous experience. So on the one hand, there is a real experience, a house break that happened long back, but there is a reality that it cannot happen again for that simple reason. We can't say it will happen every time. So that logic is lost when a person is not able to understand a vikalpa and vivirya for what they actually are. But so why this phobia? Because vrittis are there. Vrittis create samskaras. Samskaras generate obsessions. The obsessions cause phobias, and these vrittis can cause sometimes some problems of melancholia, earlier conflicts and difficulties a child may have faced can later manifest as some kind of irrational fear, anxiety, and worry. All this could happen. Can cause delusions, either delusions of reference, delusions of grandeur. Mostly delusions of reference are very common. Vivedri and Vikalpa. So that's the extensive application of the information we get from Vyasa and Patanjali. Vikalpas have many examples. When you, for example, when you hear about things which are really non-existent, when you read fiction, which are imaginary writings, that also can cause vikalpas. We know it's just a verbal formation. When you read a big novel, when you read a novel or short story or something, of course, many of these works have got some link to reality, not individual person's life, but reality linked to individual persons, but to social phenomena, social events and developments. But still, the events that you actually read about in a short story or novel have no historical validity. They're only literary value. They are not totally fictitious, because nobody will read a book which are totally fictitious. There should be some link to the reality of life. So all these writings are examples of vikalpa, but again they will remain vritti. So that means if children or students can be introduced to sublime writings, sublime words, sublime poems, music, it is one way of elevating their mind by creating the right impression, the right vrittis. Because when you read a book, you can't say, I'll read a book and I forget everything that you have read. You may forget every word, every episode that you read about it. But the book will certainly leave something. It leaves its mark on the mental system. That we can't help unless we practice yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. When we attain the vritti nirodha level, samadhi, then we can free ourselves completely from the clutches of these viparyas and vikalpas. So that is the 9th sutra. The 10th one is abhava pratyalambana vrittihi nidra, sleep. There are different interpretations of nidra. Sleep is a peculiar kind of vritti. with the basis of experience of nothingness. I mean, it's a sushupti, but still it has an active element in it that we'll discuss in the coming sutras. Now we can have interaction. Most welcome. Questions.
Maharaj, could you give an example of delusion of inference?
Delusions of inference. Reference, I'm talking, reference, not inference. Delusions of reference. There are three types of delusions. Delusions of reference, delusions of grandeur, delusions of persecution. Delusions of reference, when you meet people, your close friends discussing, you get a feeling they're actually talking about you. It is some kind of suspicion and a sign of unhealthy mind. It is an example of delusions of reference. In fact, many of the many criminals have in the interrogation were admitted that they worked under the power of the delusions of reference. So when you feel that what they're talking as a reference to you, they're talking about you. Of course, in its most unpleasant manifestations, you may conclude that they're actually conspiring against you. That is very dangerous. And again, against another one is delusions of grandeur. People frequently face this, of course, actually, Edgar Cayce is said to have preyed upon these unfortunate, hapless people. So he will tell people that you are Henry VIII in previous life. You would not complain if somebody tells you that you are Julius Caesar or Napoleon Bonaparte in one of his previous incarnations. You won't rush to deny that possibility, because actually the man is giving you a higher possibility naturally. So actually he preyed upon these people. So what happened? Delusions of grandeur, when people feel that they are Mahatma Gandhi or Julius Caesar, Christ, kind of self grandeur. See, there are three types of delusion. There are many different types. I'm not familiar with the latest findings in that area of learning, so mostly my information is based on books which I read maybe till about 10 years ago. So I'm not familiar with the latest writings and these subjects, because that's not my area of specialization. Okay, but these are examples. More or less, the fundamental principles remain the same. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pranam Maharaj. Pranam Maharaj.
Namaskar.
Is there any precedence in the pramanas? Which one takes higher precedence? Which one overtakes the other one? And
Yeah, really, pratyaksha pramana is very fundamental, because pratyaksha pramana, except anubhuti, which is actually beyond all the pramanas, pratyaksha pramana is very, very fundamental. So, what you see, pratyaksha need not necessarily be interpreted as external sensory perception. It can be interpreted as one's own experience in that sense. So, an inference, I mean, the anumana, umana, all these should justify pratyaksha pramana. Shabda pramana is unique because Vedantins and the higher philosophers admit that there are higher ideas which are beyond the range of pratyaksha pramana, direct perception or inference. So those ideas we can only learn from Vedas or any higher revealed books, but still they should be brought down to some level of our own experience. That's why in Vedanta proper, Vedantic experience, Advaita experience is called, Sarva pramana avati means it is the limit, it beyond all the pramanas. Spiritual experience is beyond all pramanas. Pramanas are needed because pramanas will help you by preventing you from going in the wrong direction. So reason is important, but experience is beyond reason. So pramanas are linked to reason, yukti, one way or other. Shruti, yukti, and anubhava. These are the three important principles of Vedanta. You read books and then you practice, then you use your own reasoning power, all the pramanas you use to understand the scripture, to analyze the scripture, to internalize what you learn. And then finally, when you experience, you actually go beyond, you transcend the pramana. So sarva pramana avati. The highest Advaita experience is called, is described as beyond all the pramanas, that transcends all pramanas. That is a uniqueness. So on the one hand, mainstream Indian Orthodox philosophical system admit the importance of reason, reasoning power, and all possible conceivable tools of knowledge you should employ. You need not blindly believe in anything. Use your reasoning power. But when you use reasoning power, you need a discipline. For that discipline, you employ the pramanas. But one should not ever imagine that the pramanas or intellect can completely reveal the truth. The reality is beyond intellect. In fact, Kant also admitted that. I mean, that our intellect should not be taken to be of paramount importance. There is something that goes beyond intellect. So that is experience. One's own inner experience is called aparokshanubhuti. That is sarva pramana avati, means going beyond, transcending all pramanas.
Thank you, Maharaj.
When we have to read a number of sutras, I don't want to crowd so many sutras, too many sutras in one class. So I thought maybe better we can go slowly.
Since yoga accepts agama pramana, it's an astika darshana. Sankhya is. Since yoga accepts agama pramana, you said yoga accepts agama pramana.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it accepts Veda pramana. So it's
it's already mentioned.
Ishvara Pranidhana. It talks about Ishvara Pranidhana. So it's clearly it's a astika darshana.
Yeah. Remember, there are two ways of interpreting agama pramana. Pramana is defined here as, pratyaksha, anumana, agama. The three pramanas in the yoga system. You have to remember, that's why the sutras are important. Pratyaksha, anumana, agamaha, pramanani, the seventh sutra. So, verbal testimony, normally in Orthodox philosophic systems, agama pramana implies the Vedas. But by implication, the Patanjali system, it also includes the other related works which are in total agreement with Patanjali's system, Patanjali's philosophy. So Agama for Orthodox Indian philosophers means ultimately the Vedas. That's the idea. Shabda Pramana, the Veda. Shabda means Veda actually.
But aparoksha anubhuti is beyond pramanas.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's why that is Shankaracharya's thesis. Sutya through Shruti, that means you read books, you read Vedas, you read other works. Yuktya, Then you use your reasoning power, you use all the pramanas, your own analytical power, reasoning power, and then anubhutya through one's own experience. So anubhava actually transcends all other pramanas. That is, anubhava is called sarva pramana avadhi. Avadhi means limit, where all pramanas come to an end. You have got anubhuti experience. So experience is the last pramana and highest and the most fundamental for every spiritual seeker.
Yeah, Anubhuti and Anubhava are synonyms.
Same, actually. Same.
Yeah.
Anubhuti and Anubhava is same.
Yes, Swamiji.
Yeah.
Maharaj, what is the difference between Nidra and Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Are there any?
Yeah. Yeah, Nidra and Nirvikalpa Samadhi are totally different things. Nidra is sleep. Nidra technically means Sushupti, deep sleep. By implication, it also could mean that intermediate stage between waking state and sleep, that is dreams and all that. Dreams also happen normally. So Nidra, the real word Nidra actually means deep sleep, dreamless sleep, Sushupti is called. That is totally different. This Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we will discuss that in the coming sutras. You know, the ultimate goal of yoga is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Chitta vritti nirodha means samadhi. Samadhi has two levels in yoga system. One is samprajnata samadhi. Samprajnata samadhi means samadhi with a focus. Then asamprajnata samadhi, which is higher. Samprajnata samadhi means when you go beyond the level of samprajnata samadhi, you reach asamprajnata samadhi. That is the state of being completely immersed in the one, becoming identified with what you're focusing on without an object. So please don't confuse nidra and samadhi. Totally different. Even animals have nidra, you know. Animals, insects, birds, all and human, all everyone has got nidra. Nidra is not something that we should struggle hard to get, except for people who have done enough mischief to themselves, so they won't get sleep. So nidra is God's free gift to all of us. But chittavritti nirodha is something that we should try to achieve deliberately through spiritual practices. That is samadhi.
But both states do not have any other vrittis, right, Maharaj?
Yeah. Actually, you get when you get in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you are beyond all vrittis. All vrittis are completely exhausted. You transcended all vrittis. Then that state is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Namaskaram, Swamiji. You mentioned about the karma leading to vrittis, leading to samskaras, vasanas, and the chakram. So the question is, when you recognize certain things causing this chakram, is there a way to not get caught into that, right? Or is there a way to break that chakram so that you don't keep doing the same mistake or whatever?
Yeah, the karma, vritti, samskara, chakram, that is a Vyasa statement. What it means is, normal human life is analyzed by Vyasa as involving our actions, then the vrittis, which are the results of our actions, then the samskaras, and under those samskaras we act again, and again we create fresh samskaras with fresh karmas, and again they go on increasing, and they again continue influencing our mind, and we act like that. It goes on rotating. So when we practice yoga, we are taking steps to get out of this way. So the sadhana pada, when we first discuss kriya yoga, tapas swadhyaya isur pranidhanani kriya yoga. Tapaha swadhyaya isura pranidhanani means. So through these three practices, it's called kriya yoga. together, we actually begin our yoga practice. That is the beginning of the road that will take you to the highest asamprajnata samadhi.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah. So thank you for the wonderful questions. And as we in Yoga Sutra, we should know, as we proceed further, as we read and understand, as we listen, the later sessions, the previous sessions will become more and more clear. Frequently, we find that many of our doubts that has emerged in our mind during the early sessions will get automatically answered as we proceed further. Okay. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tatsat. Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.
Maharaj.